thank you very much. I wouldn't have written so many words if I'd known you were going to read them all out. Thank you very much for having me, everybody. And thank you, Khadija, for all that wisdom. And it's true. I lead all of Eden Project's work with schools and the work we do on our site in Cornwall with colleges and universities. So what I want to do this afternoon is tell you something about how at the Eden Project we try to answer these questions with our visitors and our learners in the hope that some of what we've learned in our context will be useful in yours. Some of it will be about the current context for our learners, and Liam set us up really well for that. Thank you, Liam. And mostly I'm going to be talking about how we get our messages and stories about climate and biodiversity and food and sustainability, all of this big stuff across. I'll talk a little bit about what we've learned as an organisation, about organising ourselves as a sustainability-led place, and I'm going to share 4 ideas, thoughts on what you can do. And I'm really lucky, we're really lucky at the Eden Project that the topics that we've heard so much about today, it's our job to play with ideas and opportunities around how we connect people with nature and about how we teach and learn how to understand and repair and restore and protect the planet. So, that's nice. Lucky us. And we get to do that with 750,000 people a year who visit our site in Cornwall and hundreds of thousands of more online. But the job is big, as we've heard today, and our mission says that we're about creating a movement. So it's much more worth us doing our thing if some of what we've learned is useful to you and people like you as well. And full disclosure, I'm definitely a voice from outside your sector. I've absolutely been loving today the diversity of organisations and roles and voices that we've heard here. But my background's in primary and in environmental education. But actually, I think, and I hope, and I think that's useful because one of the key things about wrapping our heads around this big stuff, around these wicked problems, is not feeling on your own with it. And sometimes we use sunflowers to think about that. I don't know if we've got any botanists or biologists in the room, but perhaps you know that a sunflower is not a single flower. So each of those blobs in the middle is an individual floret. And it's only when those florets come together in the form of a single flower that they have some impact. The individual floret is beautiful and important, but it's as the collective into the sunflower where it has the impact. And my point is, perhaps that makes each of you an individual sunflower floret. How lovely. And together, we're a beautiful sunflower. And when you go back to your place, then, you're an individual floret, but within that collective sunflower of your place. Maybe your place doesn't feel much like a sunflower sometimes. I don't know, but I'm going to run with it, okay? It's my metaphor for the day. But my point really is you're not on your own with this stuff. And when we gather all of the sunflowers together and include the colleges and the businesses and the third sector organisations like the Eden Project, that's when we can, really collectively make an impact and really make a change. And my other job is to remind you, in a blatant bid to get you on side, about how important you are. The learners and the young people that you're working with are in or heading into the fastest changing world and workplace imaginable, and you've got a crucial role to play in preparing them for that. So we've been here today, but we'll take a quick look at a few of the biggies. In terms of taking a holistic view, I find this concept and framing of planetary boundaries really helpful. Has anybody come across this? So this is the work of the Stockholm Resilience Centre, who have identified 9 planetary boundaries, so 9 kind of essential planetary systems. And the green, so that's the kind of 9 sectors on the diagram, and the green space in the middle is what they define as a safe operating space for humanity. So they've identified the kind of areas for concern, and also a set of metrics for measuring those. And so we've got things on there like ozone, where we're well within the safe operating space for humanity. Ozone's a really good example that actually, global cooperation to solve an environmental problem is possible. We actually did that with ozone. But we can see as well that, climate change and biodiversity, they describe it as biosphere integrity, not looking so great. So we're going to just have a quick canter through some of those. But another holistic and perhaps even more elegant view from my colleague, Dr. Tony Kendall, that what we're talking about here are all different aspects of the same problem. This is fundamentally about our relationship with nature and how we are regarding and treating it. So we know that climate change is a game changer in this. It's called a wicked problem for a reason, and that's a technical term. And if we don't fix it, then we're just really moving the deck chairs around. The 2015 Paris commitment to keep us well below 2 degrees and aim to keep below 1.5 degrees only just survived the most recent COP, and even though it's become even clearer how crucial that distinction between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees is since then. But the current commitments that we've got don't keep us to 1.5 degrees. And if we're motivated by fairness and equity, it's even more disheartening to know, as Khadija outlined really, really clearly, that it's the poor and the disenfranchised and the already marginalised who are going to be the worst impacted by the effects of climate change. An august and measured body, such as the Law Society, put it thus: whether or not it is apocalyptic depends basically on where you are lucky enough to live and the resources you have access to. And it's true, we did some research over the summer with colleagues from the Beano when 2/3 of the young people interviewed told us that they are scared of climate change. And we know that cortisol, the stress hormone, does a really good job of shutting down our higher level brain function. So there's a job for us right there, supporting our learners to a place where they're able to think clearly and choose to take relevant action. And it's certainly the case. I talk to lots of young people who have taken the narrative around climate change to mean the end of the world is literally nigh, like the bloke on Oxford Street with the banner, rather than a more messy, complicated, unpredictable, dangerous, expensive version of the current world. I find the words of Douglas Adams strangely reassuring in this. Which is lucky, because we certainly can't cheer ourselves up by turning our attention to biodiversity. The most recent UK State of Nature report says that there's been a 13% decline in average abundance of wildlife in the UK since the 1970s. That's my lifetime, because I've been doing this stuff for a really long time too. And even if I try and get my head around it by focusing on a place I know really well, like Cornwall, it doesn't really get any better. 12% of species threatened with extinction, half of land mammals, 60% of butterflies found in fewer places over the last 30 years. And, I've become the person, I watch nature programs like kind of horror films now with the cushion at the ready to put over my eyes and block my ears. And, if biodiversity is getting a hammering now, as we start to stress test it with climate change, what was it, Liam, the golden toad? It's already part of the story. There's going to be a lot more of those stories. So our learners, all of us, are going to have to be pretty resilient in the face of this. And if you work with young people, they're coming to you out of a school system that says almost nothing about climate change, even less about biodiversity, and less still about the sorts of people that we need to be if we want to fix these problems and still be healthy and happy. The kind of, the wonderful picture that Khadija painted for us of what those kind of wider sustainability skills would look like. So the other big change, or another big change for our learners, is the world of work, which is responding quicker than education, definitely quicker than schools, and that's where you come in. So how is it shifting? Well, we know that the UK was the first to set their net zero targets into law although you could argue we haven't exactly maintained the momentum since then. And we're already seeing a shift to jobs that the International Labour Organization described like this. Lots of splendid terminology. And we also, Alex reminded us in the workshop session that the DFE have started to catch up, setting out its stall, you know, talking about career paths supporting net zero, restoration of biodiversity, sustainable future. Excellent. And there's some obvious sectors at the front line of this shift. We've already talked about some of them. Energy, agriculture, design, transport. It was really interesting during the drilling of our 4.5 kilometre deep geothermal well. I just give you a moment, a 4.5 kilometre deep hole under one of the car parks at the Eden Project to get baseload renewable energy. All of the riggers working on that project had all come out of the oil and gas industry working on this renewable technology. But anyway, given the pickle that we're in, a child sent us in a picture last week of the earth shaped like a pickle. They'd picked up on the pickle that we're in. I thought it was brilliant. I couldn't quite scan it. I wanted to add it in. But you know, the idea that that any jobs are going to do the opposite of what the ILO said and increase inefficient consumption and maximise waste and contamination and contribute to climate change is, you know, frankly, a bit weird. So we're going to see a huge shift to sustainable practices, not just in STEM, but, you know, hospitality, business management, admin, construction, tourism, that whole spectrum from dark green to medium green to light green jobs that Liam outlined for us. And just like Liam said, only mine's got a question mark. Maybe it's true. Every job is a green job. So what can we do? Well, we're educators, and it's on us to step up and use our skills and passion to help inform and prepare our learners with problems and solutions to deal with these challenges that the 21st century is going to throw at them. So let me tell you a little bit about the Eden Project and how we do that in our place. And it also comes with some nice, pretty pictures as well for a little, you know, Thursday afternoon rest of the brain. So the Eden Project is the spiritual home of entry-level environmentalism delivered to a mass audience. It's designed to be for the many, for the 94% of the population who aren't signed up to an environmental charity or campaign, and all the others as well. But, you know, it's the access thing. Who's visited? Anybody visited the Eden Project in Cornwall? Brilliant. And who had heard of it before you saw, you know, that I was on the programme, went to the Eden Project? What's that? Cool. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. What our research shows that if you were alive when the Eden Project was being built, you probably heard of it, but a lot of young people outside of Devon and Cornwall haven't heard of us at all. And we have about 750,000 visitors a year. And some come because they're interested in sustainability, and lots come because, you know, they're camping in Cornwall on holiday and it's raining. And so we use art and humour and creativity and playfulness to talk about serious things. And we want people to leave feeling optimistic and empowered and maybe a little bit angry and fired up as well. And we've got a science-based and clear-eyed view of the problems, that planetary boundary stuff, and a rather earnest-sounding mission. There's a really important people bit in there. It's not just about people and nature. It's about people and people. It's the sunflower thing. But, you know, neither of those is where we start to talk to our visitors, our learners, if you like. So before I tell you a little bit about our how, let me just tell you a little bit about the place, because 22 years on from the opening of the Eden Project, it's still a pretty good yarn. So we have got this amazing visitor destination in a hole in the ground in Cornwall, which was originally, and I think really well described, as a living theatre of plants and people. It's a place to tell stories about our relationship with the natural world through the lens of plants. And I mean, we're incredibly lucky. This is our classroom. you know. We've got a rainforest. How amazing is that? So the largest rainforest in captivity, full of, there's a kind of geographical journey through different tropical rainforests, and then full of plants that tell our stories of our relationship with nature and the people in the places where those plants come from. We've got chocolate and sugar and rice and bananas and pineapple and tropical South America. And anyway, so yeah, really great. There's a Mediterranean biome, which I love. I'm much more familiar with the Mediterranean than I am with the rainforest. And again, where there's a geographical experience, because bits of Western Australia and California and southwest South Africa have a Mediterranean climate as well as the European Mediterranean. So there's grapes and olives and oranges and all sorts of good stuff in there, all set in these outdoor gardens, which are also full of exhibits and stories, and you know, they're not just there to make the rest of it look pretty. And in the beginning, there was this bloke, Sir Tim Smith. Anybody heard him talk? Anybody been to a Tim talk? And I think it's fair to say you'd be getting a different version of this story if he was your speaker today. A much swearier one, for starters, and probably a much more rock and roll one, because he's like a natural rebel and I'm really not. But he'd also tell you his own version of the sunflower. And he describes it as his rule of 4, which is that if you want to do a thing, which, you know, for him are quite grand things, like making the lost gardens of Heligan no longer lost, or building the largest rainforest in captivity. But first of all, find your ally. Find your first follower. Find your buddy. And then once you've got 2 of you, you need to find another 2 and form your gang of 4. And then with 4 of you, you're ready to change the world. That's his version of the sunflower. So this is what he saw as a place of possibility. It's some vision. It was a china clay quarry, so this part of Cornwall, the mid part of Cornwall, Cornwall's a place of mining, amongst other things, full of quarries like this. It was reaching the end of its economically viable life, and he lit on it as a home for the first, what we must now say is the first Eden Project, which was funded as a Millennium Project and opened to the public in March 2001. And it works brilliantly. I mean, you know, it's beautiful and amazing. It works brilliantly as a symbol of transformation. Look what's possible. We don't actually always trash things. Sometimes we can leave things better than we found them, because look what we did. And we're finding that narrative works really powerfully in the different places around the country and around the world where we're now working. So let's have a little look under the bonnet at our storytelling, because that might be the stuff that's more useful for you. And unlike me today, it doesn't start with the scary stuff. It starts with heart, and it starts with connection. We talk about reconnecting people with the natural world and each other. And that might be something really simple, like I've already said, look where our stuff comes from. It's a disguise-removing exercise, like the coffee and the chocolate in our rainforest biome, or the products in our shop made from bamboo or that are recycled. It might be something a bit more complicated. It hasn't come out brilliantly, this slide. This is our Weathermaker exhibit, which explores the relationship between rainforests and climate. And there was an additional layer to it where you had an augmented reality experience, where when you held up the iPad, you could see the flows of the molecules through the tree, and the oxygen coming out, and the oxygen, your carbon dioxide being taken in by the tree, and the mycorrhizal network, the wood wide web, spreading through and absorbing the minerals and the water. So, you know, about systems and relationships and networks, not just kind of, oh, our stuff comes from nature, so we should look after it. Or it might be connection to your place and to your neighbours by randomly sitting down for lunch with them once a year. That's what the Big Lunch, another Eden project, is all about. It was a big year this year, extra big year because of the Jubilee, but 17 million people took part in community meals in early June this year. taking step one of building community resilience by finding out the names of your neighbours and being able to look them in the eye and say hello. So there's a connection thing. That's kind of where we start. And then there's a whole thing about awe and wonder. And I don't know, when I was starting out in teaching in the last century, it got talked about a lot. But, you know, it's a bit fluffy, isn't it? A bit early years. Not for us grown-ups or our grown-up or nearly grown-up learners. But, I mean, really, isn't this what we're in the business of? Finding the astonishing in the ordinary. You know, none of us went into this line of work to bore the pants off our learners, did we? So yeah, here is, again, it's not showing up super brilliantly. Here's an awe and wonder moment for some of our visitors. This is a 5-metre high ceramic sculpture called Infinity Blue. There are no effects on this picture, so the cloud around it has been created by the sculpture. It pays homage to a very small and very ancient cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, which was the first photosynthesizing organism 2.6 billion years ago-ish, thereabouts. So the thing that turned our red planet into the blue planet that everything we now know, every living thing we have ever known and has ever existed, started with a very, very much smaller and long ago version of this. And yes, sometimes we talk about memorable experiences, and I know that time is short, but I really want you to do some talking instead of me. So I'm going to ask you to play the memorable experiences game with me, and it goes like this. I would like you to think about a day out. So a time you went somewhere for pleasure, a museum, a gallery, a garden, a visitor attraction of some description, and what has stayed with you? What was your memorable experience? And then all I want you to do is turn to somebody on your table and just share your memorable experience with them. Better keep it brief because we're running a little bit late. And if you get to a and why it stayed with you, that would be really great as well. So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes. You've got a minute each if you're in pairs. Yeah.
I think you're right.
Okay, people, how are we doing? I feel I'm coming between you and your comfort break. So I don't like to get too hippy-dippy about it, but there's always something about the shift in energy in the room when I ask people to have that conversation. I really, really like it. And yeah, hopefully what you have just described and talked about might be reflected here in some of our kind of approach to interpretation, the experiences that we want to create for our visitors. It's never about the sign, is it? It's never that really interesting kind of notice board that I read. It's back to heart is what builds these memorable experiences for us. So that's where we start with our visitors and learners and our connection to the planet and each other, our dependence upon it, the awe and wonder thing, and a reminder of everything that's at stake before we hit the bad news, the jeopardy, where we explore the challenges we face and the urgency with which we need to act. But we've heard the bad news today. We're not going to go there again. But the important thing is we don't leave it there. The important bit is what happens next. And that is all about hope. And that is all about agency and action. Okay, so how do you do hope? Well, one way is about sharing stories of the good stuff that is already happening to inspire us and give us a sense of what's possible. And tone is really important in that as well. Here's a little flavour. This was one of our explainers and tale makers and a little video we made for TikTok.
I just think we're never going to stop climate change. There's far too many challenges to overcome. I suppose we do have... And then there's... I guess we could... Or change the way we... It is possible for governments to... And people do. But yeah, I guess There are solutions. So what's the problem?
Thanks, Todd. But it's also important to remember it's not just the big inspiring stories and figures, the great Gretas and the Attenboroughs, because actually that can be a little bit intimidating. Oh, I could never, that's not me. We've been involved in a research project with the University of Exeter that's really emphasised the importance of relatability of these kind of aspirational stories, hearing from people who are a little bit like you in a place that looks a little bit like yours, which is excellent because that means that the people doing an amazing and relatable stuff that you and your learners need to hear are probably in this room right now. And it's a people thing. We need to build social trust so that we can embed ourselves and our learners into communities of action. We're back to the sunflowers. So, what can we do? What can we do for nature? The first thing to know is that small actions really do add up. There's 8 billion of us as of the 15th of November, after all, and we can rely on the fact that we're social creatures, constantly casting around for social norms and adjusting our behaviour accordingly. So, every time you make a change, you're being a role model for everyone around you, and maybe you have a particular set of potentially influenceable people around you. But I'm really alive to the fact that in making the following suggestions, I am not talking about, saying that everything that we can do is an individual thing. It is, but you are all part of organisations, communities, your voters and citizens. Remember the sunflower. So that's nice. Thanks, Sam. I'm a sunflower. Brilliant. What should I actually do? I've got 4 suggestions for you, and then we're done. I was going to make a nice acronym, and then it came out NATO, and that one's already taken. So, but we're going to talk about nature, we're going to talk about alignment, we're going to talk about teaching and learning, and organisations. So, NATO, there we go. Step 1, nature. Feed your own connection to nature, and be a role model and a champion for that. It is science. Nature makes us feel better. Literally. One of the earliest bits of research on these topics showed that if you were in hospital looking out over a green space, you got better quicker than the people looking out over the car park. And we know that just being outside can reduce your blood pressure, calm the fight and flight chemicals, stretch young people's horizons, promote empathy, and the cure is cheap, generally easy to access and administer. I know that's not always true, but also has no nasty side effects. And don't underestimate the power of nature for your learners either, because you can't love what you don't know, and you won't look after what you don't love. And we know that connecting young people to nature massively improves the chance of creating active, sustainable citizens now and in the future. Nature has got a really key role in this. Alignment. This is about finding your tribe. Find your allies. It's tough on your own. And they might not be other people who do exactly the same thing as you do. We run a course at Eden Project, a sustainability leadership programme for educators, Eden Project changemakers. Our first cohort, we kind of tasked them to go and find their tribe. And they were really surprised. They're all teachers on the course. It wasn't always the other teachers. It was the school business manager, or it was the estates manager, So think broadly about who your gang is. Challenges like the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis, they're called wicked problems for a reason. They're complex and interwoven, and they thread intricately through our lives. But the good news about that is that it gives us loads of possible routes and themes for engagement and action. And you can find a way forward that works for you and your learners and your place and your tribe. Teaching and learning. Find the stories and opportunities in your subject. And we know there are loads of people in the room much more knowledgeable than me on this here today, and I've been lucky enough to hear from some of them. So find out who's doing great work, what models have they found that work for them, how's that transferable to your context and your learners? Because if every job is to be a green job, this is valid curriculum material in every subject. I was lucky enough, a couple of weeks ago, I visited Lancaster and Morecambe College, and inspired by the possibility of an Eden project in Morecambe, they've been thinking hard about integrating this stuff into their curriculum work. And when I was there, their student chefs were busy completing their curriculum coursework through creating hot meals for those in need in their community using ingredients that had been donated to a local charity. You know, just a beautiful walking the talk on sustainability and completing their programme of learning. And finally, organise your organisation. So there's some emerging research that suggests that the sweet spot for climate action is at the scale of 10 to 100,000 people. So maybe a little bit bigger than your institution, but maybe your institution plus your local community, or maybe your network of colleges. So you're in the Goldilocks zone for climate action, people. It's about being big enough to make an impact, where the cost-benefit feels manageable, being small enough to be agile, and being sufficiently local to be community-driven. Tick, tick, tick. You're there. It's also about authenticity. How can you incorporate teaching and learning about sustainability into your programs if you're not walking the talk in your organisation? And, you know, Gen Z, our particular youth generation of learners, are rightly all over this stuff, calling out hypocrisy and greenwash, and, you know, valuing organisations, saying that they want to work for organisations that demonstrate their commitment to being good global citizens. One of the powerful experiences we had with learners at Eden was on a programme called Green Talent, where we joined up with businesses like Rolls-Royce and Boots, and we did our bit, those Eden narratives of connection and jeopardy and hope and agency, and we showed how that was aligned to our operations on our site. But it was when the young people saw those same conversations reflected in those work environments that the real penny drop moments happened. And also, I feel like within, you know, shifting your operations, there are authentic opportunities for your learners, you know, your business, your catering and hospitality students, your construction students, about what is going on in your place, you know, thinking about what does your organisation buy, what food you buy and where it comes from. I'm not going to dive into the detail on all of these, this is the only one. But, you know, this is an Eden project, how we started to think about the food in our place. So we are developing, it's an evolving piece of work, our food strategy, thinking about a food systems approach and how that is reflected in everything that we do. You could think about waste. You could definitely think about energy. You could think about how you look after nature and biodiversity on your campus. And you could also think about the subtext. What? So what do you celebrate and aspire to in your place? How do you define success? I'll give you a not great example. There's this really weird thing that the Eden Project does where we reward our long-serving staff with a badge, a round of applause, and a shopping voucher. A shopping voucher? Really? Well done for being on message for 15 years. Now go consume. You know, it's just, just doesn't quite sit right. So, you know, there's a question here. Do you spend time talking with your learners about what's really important to them, to us, what it means to live well, to live a good life? Because if we don't stop and talk about it, we might all just end up believing what we saw on the telly. Or, you know, I didn't have a TV for a really long time, and I'm still shocked at how rubbish adverts are, and that apparently just by spending money I can be successful and happy and have friends and youthfulness, and, you know, that's success, really? But, you know, you're here, you're in this room because you've chosen your path slightly differently, and you've defined your criteria for success slightly differently. And that's not measured by what you have, but who you are, and who you are is a result of what you do. And I'm guessing what you do matters to you. Let's face it, I imagine we could all earn a lot more money and probably have a lot less grief doing something else not in education. But you chose something that you believe in and something that makes a proper difference to your learners and your community. You've thought about what success looks like to you, and hopefully you're happy with those choices. So let's just imagine a world where more people lived like you, where purpose and passion trump profit, because as far as I can see, that would be totally in line with a more sustainable world. happier, healthier people living their good life, less consumption, because we're not trying to fill the gaps in our lives with stuff, and surrounded by other people who've also defined success differently. So maybe just by getting up on a Monday morning, you're starting a quiet revolution and showing that there's another way. Sometimes at Eden, we used to have a sign. We describe ourselves as ordinary people trying to change the world. So that would be ordinary people who want to understand and share the myriad, complex, wonderful ways we depend on nature and find and share answers to what we can quickly and most effectively do together for nature. We'd really love for you to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.